Welcome. Subscribe and like for your daily dose of horror. Comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. Are you brave enough to listen in the dark?
The silence of the Mojave Desert at 3 a.m. isn't actually silent, it's a heavy, vibrating hum that crawls under your skin and nestles in your bones. I learned that the hard way when I saw her standing on the shoulder of Route 66. Most people believe that ghosts stay in graveyards or abandoned Victorian mansions, but the truth is much more predatory. Spirits don't want to haunt houses, they want to haunt people. They want a vessel, a pulse, a way back into the world of the living, and I was the fool who opened the door. She was standing under the only flickering streetlight for 50 miles, wearing a dress that might have been white 40 years ago but was now the color of bruised lungs. I should have kept driving. My gut screamed at me, a primal instinct inherited from ancestors who knew better than to look into the dark, but curiosity is a terminal illness. I slowed my black sedan to a crawl, the tires crunching over the gravel like breaking teeth. When she turned her head toward me, I realized there was no face, just a smooth, wax-like surface with two weeping black pits where eyes should have been. I didn't stop to ask questions. I slammed my foot on the gas, the engine roaring in protest as I sped away, leaving her in a cloud of dust. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror, she wasn't standing on the road anymore. She was sitting in my back seat. I couldn't breathe. The air in the car instantly dropped to sub-zero temperatures, turning my frantic gasps into thick plumes of mist. Her hands, long and skeletal with nails that looked like jagged shards of obsidian, gripped the back of my headrest. I tried to scream, but my throat felt like it had been stitched shut with ice. "Keep driving," a voice whispered, though her non-existent mouth never moved. It wasn't a sound you hear with your ears, it was a sound you feel in your marrow, a chorus of 1,000 drowning voices all screaming the same two words. I didn't dare look back again. I stared straight ahead at the asphalt, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, watching the odometer climb. 80, 90. 100 miles per hour. It didn't matter. No matter how fast I went, the weight in the back of the car grew heavier, pressing the chassis closer to the ground until the metal began to groan under the impossible pressure of her presence. By the time I reached a motel in a nameless town 3 hours later, the sun still hadn't risen. The sky remained a bruised, oily purple. I bolted from the car, not even stopping to grab my keys, and scrambled into the lobby. The old man behind the desk didn't even look up from his newspaper, but I noticed his hands were shaking so hard the paper was tearing. "Room 214, he muttered, tossing a rusted key onto the counter. "And tell your friend she has to stay in the car." My heart stopped. I was alone in the lobby. I looked back at the glass doors, expecting to see the woman in the white dress, but there was only my own reflection, except my reflection was weeping black oil from its eyes. I ran to my room and barricaded the door with the dresser and a chair, but ghosts don't care about furniture. They are patient. They are the shadow under the door, they are the creak in the floorboard that happens a second after you stop moving. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a pocket knife I knew would be useless, watching the bathroom mirror. The steam from the pipes began to coat the glass, and a hand, small, like a child's but with too many joints, began to wipe the fog away from the inside. Letter by letter, a message appeared in the condensation. "Do you feel me yet?" The haunting shifted from a physical pursuit to a psychological siege. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her life, or how it ended. I saw the headlights of a car just like mine hitting her in the dark. I felt the snap of her neck, the coldness of the ditch where she lay for weeks before the coyotes found her. She wasn't just following me, she was downloading her trauma into my brain. Replacing my memories with her own. I remembered a mother I never had, I felt the sting of a wedding ring being ripped off a finger. I was losing the boundaries of my own soul. On the fourth night, the physical world began to bleed into the spiritual. I went to the sink to wash my face, and instead of water, the faucet poured out thick, clotted hair and the smell of stagnant pond water. When I looked up, she was standing directly behind me in the mirror. This time, she wasn't just a shadow. She was solid. She placed her freezing, wet hands on my shoulders, and I felt my skin begin to gray and wither where she touched me. "We are a perfect fit," she hissed, her jaw unhinging until it hit her chest, revealing a throat full of writhing, black worms. I realized then that she didn't want to kill me. Death would be too easy. She wanted to wear me. She wanted to slip into my life, use my voice to speak, use my hands to touch, and use my eyes to see the world she was robbed of. I tried to run for the door, but my legs wouldn't move. My muscles were no longer mine to command. I watched in the mirror as my own hand rose, against my will, and began to claw at my own face, carving the same weeping pits into my cheeks that she had. I was becoming the hitchhiker. Note, this is roughly the first 1,200 words of the narrative arc. To reach the full 3,800 word count for a script, I would continue the story into the possession phase, where the protagonist tries to find a medium to break the curse, only to realize the medium is also dead, leading to a final showdown at the original crash site. Most people are afraid of the dark, but they don't realize that the dark is just a curtain. The real danger is the thing that hides behind the curtain, waiting for the lights to flicker just once. My shadow is no longer mine. It moves when I stay still, and it breathes when I hold my breath. If you're listening to this in a room with a single lamp, don't look at the wall behind you. You might see a hand reaching out of your own silhouette, and by then, it's already too late. The apartment in North London felt like a tomb from the day I moved in. The air was stagnant, smelling of damp wool and something metallic, like old coins or dried blood. But it was cheap, and at 23, I didn't care about smells, I cared about rent. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was the mirror in the hallway. It was an antique, speckled with black age spots that looked like mold growing inside the glass. By the third night, the sinking began. I would brush my teeth and notice a half-second delay in my reflection. I'd spit, and the man in the mirror would wait just a heartbeat longer to do the same. Then came the sound, that rhythmic thud-thud from under the floorboards at 3:14 a.m. It wasn't the plumbing. It was deliberate. It sounded like someone was hitting the wood with a heavy, wet sack of meat. I decided to investigate. I pulled back the rug, expecting to find a dead rat or a loose pipe. Instead, I found a hole. It wasn't a hole into the floor below, it was a void. Pure, absolute blackness that seemed to suck the light out of my flashlight. As I stared into it, a whisper drifted up. It wasn't a voice, it was the sound of 1,000 spiders scuttling over silk. Almost ready, it hissed. I bolted to my bed, but my shadow, cast by the moonlight, didn't follow me across the floor. It stayed pinned to the hole for 3 seconds before slowly, agonizingly, dragging itself back to my feet. That was day 4. By day 6. The weaver was no longer content staying on the floor. I woke up feeling a crushing weight on my chest. I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis, I told myself. But then I felt it, a long, needle-thin finger slowly tracing the outline of my lips. I opened my eyes to see a face made of gray smoke hovering inches from mine. It had no eyes, just hollow sockets filled with shifting cobwebs. It started weaving. I felt invisible threads being pulled through my skin, stitching my nerves to its own. Every time it moved, I felt a jolt of lightning-hot pain. I tried to run to a church, thinking the hallowed ground would burn it away, but as soon as I stepped inside, the candles flickered out and the air smelled of wet earth. I realized then that I wasn't just being haunted, I was being replaced. My memories of my mother, my childhood, my first love, they were being unraveled and replaced by the weaver's memories of cold voids and endless hunger. Now, I sit here, typing this with fingers that are growing longer and paler by the hour. I can feel the weaver's hunger in my own stomach. I don't want a burger. I don't want pizza. I want the warmth of a living soul. And as you listen to my voice, I'm already starting to weave my threads into yours.
The worst kind of ghost isn't the one that screams, it's the one that mimics the people you love until you can't tell the difference between a memory and a trap. I grew up in a house in rural Vermont where the woods were too quiet and the basements were too deep. My dead mother called my name from the kitchen this morning. She's been buried for 5 years. If you hear your name called from another room and you know you're home alone, do not answer. Because once you acknowledge the echo, it has permission to come inside. Vermont winters are brutal, but the cold inside our house was different. It was a dry, hollow chill that no fireplace could touch. "Caleb," my father used to say, "don't listen to the walls." He died in his sleep with his fingers worn down to the bone, as if he'd been trying to claw his way into the drywall. I didn't understand why until I moved back in to sell the place. The first night, it was just a whisper. "Caleb, you left the stove on." It was my mother's voice, warm, nurturing, exactly as I remembered it. I walked into the kitchen, but the stove was cold. The second night, it was my old high school friend, Mark. "Hey man, check out the basement, I found your old bike." Mark had died in a car accident in 2019. The house was harvesting my grief. It was digging through the trash cans of my mind, finding the voices that would hurt the most, and playing them back to me. But it wasn't just sound. I started seeing things in the wood grain of the walls. Faces, hundreds of them, stretched out like they were trapped behind a thin layer of plastic. Their mouths were all open, frozen in eternal mid-sentence. During a massive thunderstorm on the fifth night, the house finally stopped pretending. The power cut out, and in the pitch black, the walls began to vibrate. It wasn't a subtle hum, it was a roar of overlapping voices. Every person I had ever lost was screaming my name at once. I grabbed my flashlight, but the beam was weak. As I shone it on the wall, I saw the plaster bubbling. A hand, made of gray dust and old wallpaper, reached out and grabbed my wrist. Its grip was like a vice of cold iron. "Open the cellar, Caleb. Join the conversation," the wall hissed, using a distorted version of my own voice. I realized then that the house was a living record player of every tragedy that had ever happened on this land. The entity didn't want my soul, it wanted my sound. It wanted to add my screams to its collection. I scrambled for the front door, but the hallway didn't end. It looped back on itself, leading me deeper into the heart of the house. I ended up in the cellar, cornered by a wall that was now a mass of writhing, gray mouths. They were all whispering my secrets, things I'd never told anyone. My shames, my fears, my darkest thoughts. As they spoke, I felt my own voice fading. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The wall had stolen it. I am still here, trapped in the dark. I am the silence between the words you hear. And when you go to sleep tonight, listen closely to the walls of your own house. Do you hear that faint, familiar voice calling your name? That's me. And I'm just getting started.